So yes, what is SASA? SASA stands for Save Ancient Studies in America. Our mission is to reverse the downward trend in ancient studies by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the ancient world in order to inspire a vast new generation of students. So basically any kind of ancient studies discipline, and we do research on the downward trend to try and figure out the best ways to reverse it basically and get people taking more ancient studies classes at the university level. Matt, you can go to the next one. These are just our social media tags. So we post pretty much 5 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, about all things ancient, pretty much, mostly Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then all of our live streams are, like, the recordings are posted on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook as well. You can go to the next slide. Just some protocol for the live event. Please be kind and respectful. Listen and ask thoughtful questions throughout the event. Please send in your questions during the event. Like, these are for you guys to ask questions about what you're seeing, questions you had about the game or Archaeogaming in general. Be patient with technology and those administering it. Again, SASA Live themed. Usually they're streamed on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, but Archaeogaming is only live streamed on Twitch. And then all the recordings are posted on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. And of course, have fun. Matt, you can go to the next 2 slides very quick, basically. Again, the next one is just showing this is what a Plague Tale Innocence, that's what the game looks like. And then pretty much we can get started. So I'll hand it over to Tine. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren, for your enthusiasm, as always. Let's see. Okay, so this should be working, and you should see our little camera in the bottom. So above me is Matt, and in the upper right corner is Sacha, who are joining me today. Matt is the one who's going to be playing the game, and Sacha is going to also answer any question that you have. So I will let them introduce themselves in a minute, so you know who they are and what they specialize in and what they can help you with. As always, I'm Tine. I'm your host. I think you know me by now, but let's repeat it again. I'm a graduate student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, doing my PhD in archaeology of Israel, Palestine, and religious studies. What else should I say? I'm very interested in everything that has to do with ancient Judaism and early Christianity in the Middle East. But of course, now I do these Archaeogaming sessions as well. So I'm very interested in video games and how they can help us historians and archaeologists to communicate our historical knowledge with a broader audience, but also how the audience is receptive to these kind of video games and how we can kind of collaborate and have fun with these things, with these games, while also adding a educational trait to them. So that's kind of what I'm here for. So enough about me, because you've heard me plenty of times every single week. So I will hand it over to Matt Winter, who is going to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I am Matt Winter. My PhD is in anthropology, but I specialize in archaeology, and particularly the archaeology of the ancient Near East. Most of my research focuses on urbanism and architecture as a means to express identity, but I also do quite a bit of stuff in the archaeological sciences, especially metallurgy and the archaeology of technology. And social network analysis is another really big area of my work. I just recently finished off my PhD in August of 2020, so I'm fairly new. And I am currently at the University of Arizona, where I teach world archaeology courses and also First and Second Temple period Israel courses as well. And I will pass it off to Sacha.
Hi everybody, I am Sacha Kacki. I am a French archaeologist and biological anthropologist. My work focuses mainly on ancient plague epidemics, mainly medieval plagues, Black Death, and other epidemics in the Middle Age. And so, as a biological anthropologist, I work mainly on burial remains of these epidemics and on the human skeletal remains that derived from these burials. And I work on the epidemiology of plague in ancient time, and also on the route of transmission of the disease during this ancient epidemic. And I'm currently working as a junior researcher in the CNRS, which is a research institute in France, and I'm working in Bordeaux, in southwestern France. So basically, the place where the game we will see today is I mean, it's the place where the game is happening.
Yeah, it's amazing. We couldn't find anybody who is more qualified than you, right? You studied the Black Plague and you live in the city where this game takes place. I mean, you are like the man to talk about this game. So thank you for coming on and accepting our invitation. And I'm sure that we'll learn a lot from you today. So thank you, Sacha. And also Matt, of course. I think we should just delve in. As Lauren said, please write down your questions in the chat. Anything that crosses your mind, and we will try to answer them. But let's delve into the game and see what it is about.
All right. So did you want to just go ahead and start with a particular chapter?
No, you can just start the game as where you are, and maybe let's start with a little introduction on what the game is, what kind of genre is it, what is the story, what do we need to know to understand what is happening here in this scene.
Okay, so in this scene here, so the game is set in 1348. It's set in the middle of the 100 Years' War between France and England. So what you see marching around here are these English soldiers. The genre of the game, because of the, in the middle of this 100 Years' War, of course, the Black Death, the bubonic plague, emerged in all over Europe. So you have sort of this conflation of catastrophe of the Black Death, layered on top of this sort of geopolitical conflict between France and England. You play as a young girl named Ami, I think. Amsi, something like that. Yes, something like that. Ami, I don't know, something like that. Ami, I think. And her young brother, which you can just barely see down there, crouched around in the grass, Hugo. And Hugo has a special connection to the plague. And of course, at this level of the game, you haven't discovered what that connection is yet. So where we're at in the game, the two children are fleeing from their home, where the Inquisition, which is another added political layer on top of this, is but not the Spanish Inquisition or anything really affiliated with the church. If you actually play through the game, you see that this is sort of a fantastical version of what the Inquisition was. And they are chasing after Hugo because they believe that he has the power to control the plague in some particular way. So that is revealed a little bit later on in the game, exactly what that is. So they're running from their home. Their mother and father have just been killed, and they're trying to escape to an alchemist named Laurentius, who his mother, Hugo, their mother, had been working with to help cure whatever was ailing Hugo. What were your other questions? The genre of the game, it's a very stealth-oriented game. It's not very combat-heavy. You really try to sneak around, which is why we're sort of crouched in the grass while this English soldier is bored out of his mind walking around in a circle.
It's not really open world, huh? So it's not like how we did Assassin's Creed a couple of months ago, where you can just go and explore. This game is a little bit more linear, where you have specific tasks, and then when you finish a task, you can go to another level, right?
Correct. Yeah, this is what we call a gallery style game, where you have sort of this environment over here, but in an open world environment, of course, like I see that windmill up on the hill over there, and I would just be able to run to it. And of course, we can't do that in this game. So you are sort of directed around how you can move through the environment.
Great.
So let's try sneaking around and not get caught.
The landscape is beautiful, though. Look at that light on the mud and the wind and the weeds.
Yeah, the graphics on this game are really quite lovely.
Gorgeous.
So let's see.
What is she wearing?
I am not an expert in medieval clothing, so I don't think I could really comment on that. She's definitely wearing something. She was wearing something different earlier in the game, and I'm trying to move the camera, but she keeps spinning. So
she has like this kind of elbow piece that looks like it's from one of those knight armor.
Yeah, and her main weapon of choice is a sling, so when there is combat, you do have to use the sling, that happens sometimes. But really the game tries to direct you to be as sneaky and stealthy as possible, and not attract the attention of the enemies. So I'm going to try to sneak in here and grab some rocks. I mean, I could hurl my sling at these two guys, but that would probably be a bad decision.
So you are in the southern of France, right?
You know, I don't know where the game takes place. It doesn't really say. All of the villages and the cities are, as far as I recall, are unnamed. But the developer studio is based in Bordeaux. So I would suspect, yeah, it's probably situated somewhere down that particular area.
Yeah, this is a really good example of authenticity versus accuracy. A lot of people in the Archaeogaming community, historians, want to see a lot of historical accuracy in games, of course, with real cities and real places. This game does not do that. This game does not bring to life ancient or medieval cities that really existed and try to make them look as historical, realistic as possible. They just want to give you a feeling of the time, right? So it's fiction, but they try to immerse you in the feeling of being in 14th century France by using certain architecture that existed, by using clothing styles that existed, although not 100% correct. It's more about you having the impression or the feeling that you're in that time and space.
Correct. And I think a really good illustration of that would be to maybe jump back a chapter where you move into the village for the first time and actually encounter the plague. That might be a good chapter to play. Okay, let's do that. Let's see. I'm going to go to the main menu. I just realized for the first time it's actually kind of difficult to play a stealthy game when you have all the sound down, because of course in a stealthy game you're listening for your sound cues for when people are alerted to your presence.
But in these days they should really take into account people with different abilities. Somebody who can't hear very well should have other cues that they could toggle on to play these kind of games.
Yeah, for sure. Games have been really good about getting new controller designs to help people who otherwise would not be able to access these kinds of controllers.
Yeah, I just saw the new Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I was so impressed with all the things that you can toggle on and off. You can, for example, there are different ways to set the color scheme for people who are colorblind. So you can take out all the reds, or you can take out all the greens, or you can just play it in black and white. I was very impressed by those options.
For sure. Yeah, I've been playing that game on the side.
Oh, here's
so let's see while this is loading. And Sacha, I would actually be really interested to hear what your comments are on as we move into the village and actually encounter the way that they were sort of quarantining people in the plague to see if that's accurate at all or not.
What a beautiful cutscene.
So your question is?
Oh, when we just get into the town, we'll be coming up into the town here. So this is the chapter where they have just escaped their family home and ran away from the Inquisition, and this is the first time that they realize that there's a plague going on, that something fishy is going on here. So come into this town, get a really beautiful view.
It's beautiful.
Really lovely view of a very typical kind of hilltop medieval town that you might see.
Little goose. It's very detailed. Chicken running around.
Yeah, the developers were put a lot of love and labor into this game, I think.
I think so. I mean, for not, like we said, not being historically accurate, they could have gotten away with a lot less than these kind of details. You know, you see the tracks in the mud of the cartwheels and the horses. It's very impressive.
Sure, yeah.
Look at that.
So here we're coming into this village, and again, this is an unnamed village. So I've never been to a southern French village, so I can't comment on whether this is accurate. But
Yes,
I have been to Italian ones.
How your town looks like.
Yeah, I have been to Italian ones, and this looks very similar to that. Go ahead, Sacha.
So I visited a lot, of course, of southwestern French villages, and that's true that it's quite accurate, because this is a place with a building with 2 floors and small alleys and so on. So it's actually quite close. Even you see the architecture with wooden elements on the first floor is very typical of places like in Dordogne and these kind of places in Lot, which is, I think, the place where the game is supposed to happen. Because if I understood well, according what I've read, it's supposed to take place in a place which was called, I can't remember. It's sorry, I cannot remember, but it's really in the southwestern France. Can be in Dordogne, for example. It was called the Guyenne at this time, and it was in the southwestern quarter of France. So it's actually quite accurate regarding what we actually have as medieval villages that are still preserved.
Really? Yeah, I was just looking at that door. Can you go back to the door, or like just at the windows? How the glass is so well done. You see the little, like, because they didn't have the ability that I know of making these big glass panels as we have in Windows now, right? So they could only make little pieces of windows at a time. So it's really beautifully done here.
Yeah, this would be a style of glass called. I mean, I can comment on the architecture because that's sort of my area.
Go ahead.
But yeah, this would be like a leaded glass. So yeah, you're absolutely correct that the window panes would not be very big. So you would have this kind of lattice structure inside there, like you see there, and then you would fill those panes with glass. One thing that I actually did notice is here again of accuracy versus, how did you phrase it earlier? Accuracy versus
authenticity.
Yes. So here, for example, the roof tiles would be accurate but not authentic. So roof tiles were used quite extensively in medieval France, but the style, this S-shaped style, is not found in medieval France. You would actually see more of a scalloped ceramic style, or just a flat, it's called a beaver tail style of roof tile. So again, just something really, really small, but it doesn't take away the effect of the game at all, really.
That is super fascinating. Yeah, I also see like on the building on the right, like in between those wooden panels, there's like this fish. Is that how you call it? Fishbone motif.
Oh, the herringbone motif
of like the bricks.
up here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of like the bricks being put in a certain structure, in a certain way.
So let's go through here, and then as we come up, we'll see for the first time that you start to see the houses that are marked off for quarantine. Should I put captions on so you can
Perhaps, yeah, that would help.
Because then you can hear what the, I don't know if it would be under audio. Language. Display subtitles. Okay. And just for.
I by the way always put subtitles on any game that I play. I never know what background noise is going to be in my house, and I want to be sure to capture it all.
Okay, I think that should do it. Yeah, I never play with subtitles. If I ever see anything in subtitles, I just get too distracted reading the subtitles.
See, Americans, they're just not used to it.
Okay, let me step in as an American and say that I have subtitles on literally everything that I watch too. So maybe
and we're watching TV, and I'm like, could somebody turn on the subtitles for me, please? Thank you. Sorry.
I'm so much more used to it, and then you don't miss anything. And when they use those words, you can read it to make sure you know what they said.
Exactly. And the spelling of names and places, I need to see it.
So here we've come full circle around, and again, I'm just sort of showing a little bit of what the town is like.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Like a little bridge here.
And we'll go back, and then, so as they come up through around this bend, you get the lovely little icons stuck in the wall there.
Yeah, the statue.
Yeah, and again, I've seen these in, I haven't explored much of France outside of Paris, so my knowledge on this is pretty slim, but I've seen something very similar to this in Italy. So I would assume that this is fairly accurate.
Yeah, I think this is another example of, I wouldn't know who this particular saint or whomever it is, but it looks like it could be a religious saint or martyr, somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is interesting, and this is what I want to hear from Sacha. So I've played the game myself in the past, and so they explain that the plague is going around in this place, and every door that has a white cross, somebody inside has or had the plague, and so they're thinking this place is now contaminated, so you shouldn't go in. Sacha, can you explain to us if was that true? What was the reason for this, etc.?
Yeah, so actually it's true, but it's not true for this time period, because as far as I'm aware, the practice of putting crosses on the walls of houses of people who died from plague only occur in the 15th or 16th century, not during the Black Death, as far as I know. And so it was actually to make clear that this place has been infected by the plague. Because of course, during the Middle Ages and the modern period, people were not aware of the way the plague infected people, and the most common theory was that it was caused by miasma, which were some corruption of the air. And so, of course, if you were close to someone who suffered from the plague, it can possibly transmit by this miasma. And so the place was unhealthy. So one particular thing what was done at this time was to burn some wood or spices to change the smell of the air, because the smell was considered to be the materialization of the miasma.
Oh, so they would think that a face mask doesn't work because you can still smell.
Yes, exactly. Actually, later on the 17th century, doctors start to wear this mask. You know, with the big. You probably have already seen this costume, but the point of the nose of the mask was to put some spices inside for the odor. So it was not directly to make protection for some kind of bacteria or so on, because it was not known at this time, but it was to put some odorous matter in the nose.
Wow, so 500 years later or 400 years later after this, they still hadn't figured it out.
Yeah, actually, the cause of the plague and the route of transmission of the plague was discovered only at the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the third plague pandemic. And so it started in Hong Kong mainly. And so there were many doctors from France, from Germany, who went to Hong Kong to try to track the cause of the plague. And they discovered at this time the bacteria which caused the plague. But before the end of the 19th century, nobody knew what was the exact cause of the plague.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. It's interesting that you say that there's that they use spices, because there's a scene coming up here in a bit where they go into a monastery and they see that the monks had been putting spices into their water while they were taking a bath. Did they do things like that as well?
I never heard about that, but it's possible. I'm not sure actually for the fact of drinking some spices. Not sure.
Would they also burn? Because I saw a couple of burned down, people and houses. Would they also burn down houses when there was plague manifested in it?
Actually, not so much. What happened later, also in the 16th century and 17th century, is that most of the people who suffered from plague were put in infirmaries, and these infirmaries were generally made of wooden battlements, wooden buildings, and these buildings were generally burned out after the end of the epidemic. But I'm not sure the houses of the people were burned.
Okay.
I don't think so, actually, because it's difficult to burn half of the city of the people die.
Yes, it seems easy to put a couple of burned down houses in a video game, but then if you think about it for yourself, it's a big step to burn down your own house or your neighbor's house.
Can I just jump in and ask a question that's along those lines? Because they were showing them like burning people alive. Did they burn people alive?
I think this was the Inquisition in this video game, right?
Yeah, so you have well, the villagers are doing this in that particular scene, but of course, yeah, you do have the Inquisition, and I'm not sure if I mean, I would assume, and Sacha, you can correct me on this, but I would assume that a lot of superstition would have been wrapped up in how the plague spread, and so, you know, of course, witches and that sort of thing would be the first thing to blame.
Sure. So actually, the main theory was that it was a punishment of God for punishing the people for their sins. But other theories were that some people, so generally foreigners or poor people or even Jews, were accused to cause the plague and to spread the plague by, for example, poisoning the wells and poisoning the rivers. And so some of these people, and notably the Jewish community, was harassed, and some people were even killed, and there were some big events, for example, in Germany and in northern France. Many Jewish communities were harassed, and sometimes many people were killed.
So nothing has changed, you're basically saying. They were blaming foreigners, poor people, and the Jews.
Yeah, sure. I think
and tall people too.
These history tend to repeat the same things, and especially when it's time of crisis and people search some rational explanation and on someone to blame for these difficult moments.
Right. So I had a question. I have always had this question. So you say sometimes they would put people in an infirmary when they had the plague, and then when the plague has passed, they might burn the building. What does it mean for the plague to has passed? Like, how does a plague end?
This is a complicated question because we actually have no good explanation for that. You know, for example, for the Black Death, what happened is that between a third and maybe 50%, 60% of the European population died at the time, which is really huge. So among the people who do not die were the people who were lucky enough not to be contaminated, and maybe a few of them also who were sick but did not die.
Right.
So at the time, it's more that most of the people were infected or are in an area where the plague didn't spread. So when there were not much people that were not infected, the plague tended to stop after most of the people were infected. And also related to the route of transmission, we didn't speak about that yet, about the route of transmission of the disease. Actually, the plague is not a disease of humans. It's first a disease of rodents, such as, for example, marmots and rats. And so the rats are the main the main reservoir for the disease, and the rats are bitten by fleas, and these fleas transmit the disease. And when the fleas bite a rat which is infected and then bite a human, the human become infected. So it's also depend on the size of the rat population, because the rat will also die during the epidemic. And so at some point, all the rats will be dead of the disease and cannot transmit anymore the disease to humans. Because when it's the flea that transmits the disease, it cannot transmit the disease from one human to another. It's always from a rat to a human.
Ah, okay. So basically what you're saying, a plague doesn't end. It's just like everything is dead. And then it is away. But It doesn't really. There's no cure, or there's no like. It's not because the weather changes or whatever that it ends. It's just like everybody who can have it is dead, and the survivors are immune, or the ones who just like by coincidence not get it, and that's just it.
Yeah, the climate can play a role, of course, because during the winter, the rats tend to go to the burrows and leave the place where they are in the vicinity of humans. So they tend to go to their burrows for the winter, and then at the next spring they can go out again, and a new epidemic starts. So this is also a factor for explaining that there were some seasons where the epidemic were more frequent than others.
Right. Okay, Matt, are we coming to a certain spot that you wanted to show?
No, I've just completely frozen on my end, so I don't actually even see what you guys are seeing.
Ah, it's frozen.
Yeah.
It's we are seeing the two kids hiding behind some wooden shutter, and that's about it. Are you still playing the game?
I'm trying, but it's not letting me. The game is frozen on my screen, so I'm seeing when I tab out that you're still seeing a live stream, but on mine I'm completely stuck.
Oh yeah, you might have to close the game and reboot it and start from a different chapter or something.
Yeah, it's not letting me get to Task Manager. That's the problem. So I can't get out of the game. It's like completely frozen. Oh, and
around and stuff.
But I turned my Twitch.
okay, I'm back.
Okay. I think we are back.
Sorry about that. I don't know why it just suddenly froze and didn't really give me a reason why.
It's okay. We, as I said, we literally.
This is exactly why we have our disclaimer in the beginning. To be patient with our technical.
Exactly.
It always happens. We'll cut this out when we put it on YouTube. But yeah, something always happens. So
we're still okay on Twitch and streaming and everything.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The game is loading again on Twitch, and people can hear us again.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what happened. It just sometimes games glitch and they crash, and that's just what they do, especially on
PC.
If
anybody wants to get a new computer, I'm sure he'll be glad to give you his bank account number. So.
I've actually got a pretty good computer. Sometimes games just glitch. That's just.
It is true.
That's just what
Speaking of Valhalla again, it freezes on me every so many hours. It drives me nuts, but it is what it is.
Okay, so I'll actually just skip ahead to the next chapter then, because I think we saw a good amount of the village.
Yeah.
And then I think this chapter is really good because it introduces the rats, and of course, Sacha, you can talk about the rats and all of the fun rodent stuff that you've been researching.
Can I ask something really quick before we talk about rats? Because we were talking about the masks and everything. And Sacha, did you say that that wasn't really this time period, though? That was later when they started wearing the creepy mask?
Sorry, I'm not sure I didn't understand your question.
Like the mask, like the bird face mask, and you were saying that they put the spices in the nose and stuff like that. Was that not during this time period?
Yeah, so the use of spices and so on was during the 14th century, so it was clearly during this time period. But the mask where you put it the spice, the mask, it does appear way later in the 17th century.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking, that it was later, because they don't show that kind of those masks and stuff, which is what everyone thinks of when they think of the Black Plague, right? Like that's the first thing you put in your head is rats and those masks. But they don't have that in the video game then.
No.
No, not
Okay.
in this game. So before our little thing crashed, so the game was they run through the town and escape the angry villagers, and Amicia has to make her first kill. Part of the game, when you play the full game, is actually kind of the character development of Amicia connecting with her brother, but also her maturing into a woman, because in this portion of the game, she takes her first life, even though she doesn't want to, and actually as we come up here to the altar, she's going to sort of to talk about that. And that's very much a focus of the game, was this developing this relationship between brother and sister, but also a girl's coming to age as she's really thrown into this very challenging environment.
Do you know anything about the architecture of this church, Matt?
Sure. So we can, again, this is sort of a fictional church. It's as far as I know, is not a real building. But as we move through this, some of the stuff that we see in this architecture did catch my eye. This style of architecture would be quite common in this part of France. If it is taking place in southwestern France, this would be a Romanesque style church. And everything in here looks fairly accurate. You would have the wooden building, or the wooden roof. In fact, actually, this was one of the reasons why, as we move throughout the rest of the building, you'll see that I'll point out an area where there's something called ribbed vaulting, which is sort of a way that you can lighten the load. So arches compress the load down from the arch into the ground, and that's how you can build these big structures. But one of the disadvantages of a Romanesque style church is it had to have really big arches and really big thick walls to absorb all of that pressure down. The invention of the ribbed vault, first of all, allowed, if you look at this, I'm looking at the ceiling now and you can see that it's made of wood. This was a problem because they often caught on fire, especially because they were often the tallest structure in the city, so lightning strikes and that sort of thing. This was a huge problem in all over medieval Europe, was the roofs of churches constantly catching on fire. And of course, you know, all the candles and rituals that are happening inside the structure. So the use of the rib vault actually allowed the roofs to be made of stone, because it allows for a lighter a lighter touch of stone to be used,
right?
And then the compression would go down the rib, so it sort of strengthens the arch. And we'll see some of that later. But the other nice thing too is if you really think about those kind of high Gothic cathedrals, of course this is a Romanesque style church, and they were dark, as you can see in here. This is a very dark building. And that was because the buildings, the walls, had to be thick enough to be able to support those arches, but that meant that you couldn't put windows in. So with that high Gothic style of architecture, that ribbed vault really allowed for those nice, really beautiful stone roofs, but also allowed the walls to be a lot thinner, so you could put in things like lots of windows to make sort of these really brightly lit churches.
Interesting. I noticed the furniture. Would they have these kind of wooden benches? Because I've heard that in medieval times, people wouldn't actually sit on benches during service. They would just stand up. Or was that already at this point replaced by benches to sit down on?
You know, I don't know for sure on that. There's certainly no permanent architecture in terms of pews and benches. But I would suspect that if there were benches used, it would probably be for the wealthiest people to sit in the front part of the church. Oh, yeah. And then the back portion of the church would be open and left for standing. And if you go into a lot of cathedrals in Europe today, you'll see that a lot of the seats are pushed way up to the front, up by the apse of the church. And then there's a lot of standing room behind. I think some of those cathedrals can hold upwards of 10,000 people inside them if they're all standing.
Oh yeah, some of them are huge. So this is part of a monastery or something?
Yeah, so it looks like you're in the here's sort of the clerestory for the church that you can see. Really typical Romanesque style church, where it's sort of two long barrel vaults that make a cross. Basic style of the church, and if you're familiar with Roman architecture, this is the basilica. It's the same basic idea. You just plunk a cross on the top of it, and boom, church. And then this would be the cloister inside, where all of the parishioners would live, or the monks rather. Sacha, was sulfur used? That's one of the collectible materials that you can get in this game. Was sulfur used extensively to combat the plague? Do you know?
Not that I am aware of, so I would say no, but I can be wrong. But I don't think so.
And here's the point where he runs in and he sees the medicinal herbs inside the tub.
Oh yeah.
So it was just interesting when you were commenting on the use of the spices and herbs.
They have a whole jacuzzi set up there.
I know.
Nice.
Some fine living.
Multiple. It's a whole space just for jacuzzis. But you also use the sulfur in this game to make fire, right? Because the rats are afraid of fire, isn't that?
Yeah, you use it as a crafting material. Saltpeter and sulfur, and then you can create fire and like little explosive things. So of course, that's further down in the game when you unlock that ability.
Right. So it's not as much to protect your body, whatever, but more to make fire. Chase away the... Would people be buried in the middle of this garden? Or is this just an emergency situation?
As far as I know, no, they would not. But Sacha might be able to comment on that. Actually, that's a question I had for you, Sacha, was... so you said that there would be sometimes use of fire to kind of purify these spaces. Do we have archaeological records of burned down areas or mass inhumation, mass graves, where we can see that this is a clear archaeological signature of a pandemic?
Yes, actually we have. So for the last part of them, we do not have any signs, as far as I know, of burned down buildings and so on. But we have a lot of mass graves related to the plague. So most of them in Europe. In Europe, we have maybe 20 burial sites related to the Black Death, and maybe 30 or 40 more related to later plague epidemics.
Wow!
From the late 14th to the beginning of the 18th century, because it's actually all the same pandemic which started in the mid 14th century and which lasts for the next 4 centuries, with recurring epidemics during 4 centuries. And yes, we have actually thousands of skeletons of people who died of plague that we know are related to this disease. So yes, we have quite a lot of mass burial, but it's only a part of the victim, actually, because probably most of them were just buried normally in individual graves. But of course, these graves are really difficult to identify as the plague of the grave of plague victims, and it's really easier to figure out that big mass graves are related to the disease.
But you would be able to look at the bones on the skeletons and look for evidence of distress to the bones, or do you ever find fire burning on any of the bones in these graves?
Traces of fire, you mean? No. The people were just buried. Just the corpses were buried, but they were not.
The corpses weren't burned and then disposed of.
No, actually, it's quite complicated to burn a body. You need a lot of wood to burn a body. And when you have a lot of victims, thousands of victims, hundreds of victims, it's really complicated to burn them. So it's really easier to dig a hole and put them all together in a hole.
Mm. So how does the plague manifest in one's body? What are I mean, I know the symptoms are. Yeah, can you just explain what happens to you when you get the plague, and would any of those symptoms be visible on a skeleton?
Yeah, sure. So when you are still alive and you are affected by the plague, the main symptom is that you will have some buboes. So on the armpit, notably, you can have this swelling. Which are called buboes, and it's actually the place where the bacteria multiply before it spreads through the body and causes septicemia, which causes death. So it's the main symptom, and of course you have some fever and so on, general sickness, but the main symptom which make it different from other diseases are the buboes.
Right.
The problem with that is that, of course, these buboes, they do not leave traces on the skeleton. Mm-hmm. And because you die very fast when you have the plague, in 5 to 7 days, you're dead.
Oh, wow.
Or you recover, but if you die, you die in about a week. So the skeleton doesn't have enough time to create some lesions.
Right.
So actually, when we find the skeleton of putative plague victims, we do not have signs on the bones. So to be sure that the people died from plague and not from another disease, we actually use some ancient DNA techniques. So we track down the DNA of the bacteria that can still remain in the bone and mainly in the teeth. You can find the DNA, and if you find the DNA, it's really specific to the bacteria, and you can be sure that the guy who died had plague before he died.
Wow. So basically, if you have graves, you just have to do a specific test on the bones or the teeth to figure out if the plague was the cause of
exactly. You first have to find to have some hint, to have some archaeological evidence that there were a mortality crisis, and then you can just test to find out if it was the plague or another disease yes, by testing on the bones.
Wow. Can that be done for any? Because I like I said, I do Israel Palestine. I know we have the Justinian plague in the 5th century. Would that be the same thing? And would you be able to do the same tests there on skeletons from the 5th century or 6th century?
Yes, so the Justinian plague was between the 5th and beginning of the 8th century, and it's actually the same disease. So it's really the plague, which is not the case, for example, so for the Antonine plague during the late antiquity. It's not the same disease. It's called plague by the historian and the writers, but it's another disease most probably. But the Justinian plague is actually caused by the same bacteria, and is the same disease that during the Black Death.
Huh. Great. I didn't know that. I mean,
talk about the rats here. Oh, sorry, Tina. I didn't interrupt.
Yes, sorry. No, go ahead. We should talk about the rats.
This is for Sacha. I know that one of the why would the rats be kind of the main bad guy in this game? Can you explain the relationship between rats and the plague?
Yes, sure. So as I said before, the rats are, among other rodents, the main reservoir for the disease. It means that the bacteria live in the rat populations, and it can just stay in the rat population if there are enough rats, and the fleas of the rats have enough rats to feed themselves. The problem starts when the fleas have not enough rat to feed themselves and try to feed on other mammals. And one of those mammals are the humans, and if the rats are in close vicinity with the humans and the fleas bite the humans can become infected. So actually, of course, in the game, the rats are the bad guy because they are the species that transport the disease. But actually, the bad guy should be the fleas. But I guess the game would not have been so spectacular with people fighting fleas in the game.
Or at least it would be a lot more difficult to program that.
Yeah, sure.
So in theory, if you could keep away the fleas from your body with like a cream or whatever, you wouldn't get the plague.
Yeah, in theory, that's true.
Yeah.
Now, were there other species that the plague could jump between? So there's obviously fleas biting humans, but do we see this transmitted into other domesticated animals or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, so the plague still exists today in many countries of the world, including the US. Any year in the US there are some maybe 20 or 30 cases of plague, and most of these cases are related to domestic animals, which are infected by fleas of rodents that beat these domestic animals. And these domestic animals that can be infected include the dogs and the cats.
Huh. And they die too?
I guess they can die too of the disease because they are not natural reservoirs, such as marmots, for example, are natural reservoir, and they don't really die of the disease. The bacteria live in these species, but do not die them, which makes sense because the bacteria need to have some hosts that can live. If not, the bacteria will disappear with the hosts.
Would there be a chance that the bacteria goes from fleas to like ticks?
You mean that the bacteria are transmitted by other vectors than the fleas?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So actually, there are some theories that possibly during the Black Death and the medieval modern plague epidemics, the disease was transmitted from between humans and not involving the rats. Through body lice, for example, who could bite a human and then bite another and transmit the disease from human to another and help to make the disease spread in the population, which could explain why the plague was so deadly during the medieval period, because in more recent epidemics in the end of the 19th century, 20th century, the death toll was really lower than during the Black Death. So maybe the route of transmission was not exactly the same during the Middle Ages, and it's maybe why the Black Death was so deadly.
Oh, that would be so creepy. I mean, ticks are already so dangerous, and they're becoming more and more widespread. But during climate change, if they would start spreading the plague, I would not like that.
Yeah, so I mean, we are lucky now because we know how to cure the disease. We have some antibiotics which works well to cure the disease. So in the maybe 20, 30 people who have plague every year in the US, most of them are cured and don't die of the disease. Maybe one or two guys die a year because they are treated too late and die because the treatment comes too late. But yeah, actually today it can be cured. So that's great. This is okay. We have to deal with other ones.
Yes, there seems to never be an end to pandemics.
So one thing that I noticed, that not to completely change gears, but to completely change gears. One thing that I noticed that I thought the developers did really good at in sort of, again, that issue of accuracy versus authenticity. Here, this scene caught my eye when we were going through this, because this is actually quite accurate and quite authentic, actually. I did look up, this is, it's out of my area of specialization, but I did look up what the ceramics were like in medieval France, what the sort of typical decorations were, and how they would have made, what were some of the typical shapes that you would find. And the developers did a really good job on this. This is exactly the kind of decoration. I wrote it down. It's called sgraffito style decoration. This sort of light, kind of wavy, kind of waving in the wind vegetal motifs were really, really common, and this was actually a wide distribution of this type of decoration from France into Brittany and Normandy, and then into Wales and England. And then the vases here are glazed. So this is a pretty typical thing that develops in the 13th, or in the medieval period in Europe, is the use of leaded glaze. And this sort of caught my eye because, again, I do also the archaeology of technology and I've spent some time looking at different kind of glazes and slips that you might find on different kinds of ceramic wares. This develops.
Yeah, I thought this was glass, but it's not glass. It's just glazed pottery.
It's glazed pottery, and it's not quite a material called faience, which is something that develops pretty early in Egypt and then into the Near East. And then it sort of faience goes away. They were using faience a little bit later, but this kind of slipped leaded glaze, that's a technology that actually develops in the Middle East. And you see this especially in Islamic architecture with the glazed tiles. And then that technology, you do see it pretty early in the Byzantine period in like the Levant, but it's not making its way into continental Europe until much later. But I did think that I thought the designers did a really nice job on, just looking up this kind of little bit of pottery here and just giving that flair of authenticity.
Right.
It's a really lovely touch.
Is there other stuff on the tables that we can look at? Material culture?
I'm sorry, say again?
Are there other things on the table here that we can take a look at? Other objects, or I saw some candles. But
yeah, I mean, and I got, none of this would really survive. I guess there's a little knife there.
A wooden bowl.
Yeah, none of this with some forks and, I don't know. I guess that's maybe how forks looked then. I'm not really sure.
Oh, yeah. It is. The two
tine. Yeah.
The trite thingies.
But, it would have been very tempting for the developers to put some kind of, extravagant plastered image here that wasn't really really what you would have seen at that point in time. And again, just a little bit of brief research showed that, in fact, they actually did a pretty good job representing what that would have looked like.
Right. Yeah, I looked around a little bit on the internet, and I mean, I didn't contact the makers of this game or anything, but I couldn't find any evidence that they hired a historical consultant or anybody for this game. So I would be curious to know if they just did their own internal research and some Googling, or if they had a specialist involved or not. As far as I could read, they did not. Otherwise, I think I would have found some interview or some evidence of this on the internet. I think they just did their internal research.
This guy died a horrible death, not only eaten alive by rats, but in the latrine on top of it.
Oh, pretty gruesome, all these images of these skeletons. Ugh. I love how you have like a stick and not like a torch. It's just a stick that you use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the attempts of the game to get you to move quickly. Because if you saw when I had the torch, of course I would just wander around and look at stuff. But
yeah. Oops. Have you ever seen that? There's like a YouTube video of a guy who does experimental archaeology, and so he has an expert on torches. And he said every time that I see in movies that they're going somewhere holding a torch and they put the torch in front of their face, I get so angry. Because you wouldn't see anything. You need to hold a torch behind you so that you can actually see what is in front of you. You would be blinded by having the flame right in front of your face. That's all you would see. You wouldn't see the wall of the cavern or anything in front of you. So people should always walk with their torch behind their head to have light. It's a very interesting video. You kind of like demonstrate that in a cave and such, and like I never forgot about that.
I wouldn't have thought about that, but it also makes sense that otherwise you'd be inhaling smoke the entire time too.
Right.
Which I don't think would be particularly pleasant.
Look at all those rats.
Sacha, when you said earlier, I'm really interested by this these mass graves that you would have found. What's about the average number that you find bodies inside these mass graves, and where are these graves located in the city? Or are they outside the city walls and the ancient city walls? Where are these graves located, and how many people are in them?
So it really depends of various factors. It depends on the time period, and it depends on the size of the cities or villages. So first, of course, when the plague struck a small village, the mass grave contain only one or two guys, because it's the guy who died the same day. Big city, for example, there are some mass graves in London or in Barcelona, where you can have more than 100 skeletons in the same grave. So it really depends a lot of the daily death toll. So of course it's very different depending on the size of the city. Regarding the place where the people were buried during the Black Death, actually most of the plague victims were still buried in the parochial cemeteries with the other dead, with the other people who died in other periods than the epidemic. For the Black Death, we only have 2 cases where cemeteries were created just on purpose to bury the plague victims, and both these cemeteries are in London. They are called the West Smithfield and East Smithfield cemeteries, and both were used in 1348, 1349, and after the end of the epidemic, the cemeteries were abandoned. And actually, most of the cemeteries that were created for the plague victims were not contemporary of the Black Death, and they are more in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, at the time where people were put in infirmaries, and generally the cemetery were in a relation with the infirmary, and this infirmary and cemeteries were outside the city at that time period. But it was not the case most of the time during the Black Death.
Oh, right, and we have escaped. That's super fascinating. It's, I wouldn't have thought that they would have actually just been buried in the same graveyards. I would have thought that they would have removed them and taken them somewhere else and dug mass graves out there.
Yeah, a bit like leprosy. That's kind of how I often imagine it. People being like out of society.
Yes, but actually it was I think what was thought during a long time was the plague victims were just put somewhere else, and it's really the archaeology which proved that it was not always the case, and most of the victims were in communitary cemetery, parochial cemeteries, which is I think for the burial archaeology it's important that it has proven that the people were not excluded from the cemetery, were not excluded from the communities.
Now we're starting chapter 4. Is that the one that we started with in the beginning?
Yeah. So where we are in the game is they've escaped the village, and now they're on their way to find Laurentius. And one thing that actually, I don't know if there's any meaning behind this, but one thing that kind of caught my eye throughout this game is this idea of historical memory, or the wisdom of the ancients. It was interesting to me that the alchemist uses Roman techniques, and he has a Roman-ish kind of name, more Roman than French kind of name. And then throughout the game, one thing that really struck me was sort of this historical memory. So as you move throughout the game, you'll encounter Roman ruins, or you'll see these really, really fantastic aqueducts, which of course in southern France are still, the Pont de Garde is a fantastic example of a preserved aqueduct. And then of course at some point you sort of unlock the mystery to Hugo's problem when you go into the Roman bath portion of your family villa. Something that really kind of really struck me.
So what do you think that is? Is it that typical trope of like black, dark medieval times? They didn't have a lot of scientific knowledge. The Romans were the ones who who knew how the world, needed to be run and had all the scientific knowledge. Is that what you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very tropic thing that you'll see in video games, especially games that center on archaeology, is this idea that ancient people had kind of wisdom that we don't have, or that knowledge has been lost. And in particular to epidemics, I would say that Sacha could probably comment a little bit more about whether they actually did know anything more, but my initial inclination is probably not much. More knowledge was had by the Romans than by later people. So I think it plays into that trope, but I just think also the memory of the past is something that people often. It's a very powerful thing to think about the past, and this is set in 1348, so this is a population that's 1,000 years removed from Rome.
Right.
We're closer to them than they were to Rome.
Right.
So, this is an old empire that has left its fingerprints on the land, and if I had gotten a little bit further, you'd be able to see, these aqueducts and these Roman ruins throughout the city. But I don't know, Sacha, can you comment on did ancient Greeks and Romans have a better understanding of the plague than medieval people did, or were they pretty clueless too?
Yeah, so for the plague, really the disease plague, it actually doesn't happen during the Roman period. So, of course, they were not confronted to this specific disease, but there were many other epidemics, and they were not better to cure it than medieval people were to cure the plague. So I think that there were a lot of famous physicians for the Roman period,
right?
And in the Middle Ages, most of the physicians were just reproducing the concept of the Roman period. Mm-hmm. I think this is why they consider it's often considered that the Romans were more advanced than in the Middle Ages, but they were not better to cure the disease, and the treatment were basically the same, such as I'm not sure of the name, but removing blood and humors. So it's basically what have been done in the Roman period, and it's basically what was done in the Middle Ages, and using plants to try to cure people. But actually, I wouldn't say that Roman physicians were better than in the Middle Ages. At least with respect to understanding and curing the epidemics.
What was the state of medicine in the 14th century? Do you know that? Were they already doing operations, or how did medicine work?
So, sure, operation, yes. And during the 14th century, for example, what was done is to just cut the bubbles to try to remove what was inside the bubble. So it was a surgical operation, but it was actually not effective.
Right.
And for other aspects, of course, during the Middle Ages, there physician made imputation and these kind of things.
Yeah.
It was done, yes, of course.
Yeah, so they were basically doing the same as in the Roman period, as in focusing on the body and what you can actually see, and like the blood and the gall and stuff, but not looking at bacteria and
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so ancient populations were just as susceptible to this as well. I mean, I know that maybe they didn't have specifically the bubonic plague, but from what you've said, there were a number of other epidemics. Did these happen at the same kinds of rates that we would have seen in medieval period. Because I know one thing that people talk about is, well, you know, Rome had such great sanitation, and I've always wondered how true that actually really is. I mean, yes, Rome had a great infrastructure and great sanitation, but it's not like other people lived in squalor. People understood the basic kind. You go to medieval Europe and you can see sanitation and sewage and that sort of thing in the infrastructure. So were they just as susceptible, or were they really actually better than other periods?
I'm not sure, because I'm not a guy working a lot on the Roman period, so
Fair enough.
I don't want to say not accurate. I'm sorry.
I think, Matt, I think also in the Roman time we have to make a difference between the rich and the poor, right?
Sure.
I don't think
absolutely.
those in Rome, where people lived in apartments put together, where they all had to go to the same public bathroom at the end of the street, was very hygienic. Not everybody had hot tubs or access to the thermae.
Yeah. Now, this was interesting that the pottery that you can specifically pick up to throw is decidedly not medieval French style. And I'm not sure why they went that way. I don't know if it was just a style that's visual, so it catches your eye, so you know how to pick it up. But as someone in the Southwest, that actually looks a whole lot like white on black ware that you would find here in the Southwest, rather than something you would find in medieval France.
In the West, yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. I don't want to read into that, but I did think that was a little bit interesting.
It is interesting here. The walls are made of this not mud brick, but like clay with straw in it.
Yeah, the
like
sort of wattle and daub.
Made in stone. So there is a difference between the countryside and the city life architecture.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so we have 5 more minutes. I don't know, Matt, if there's still something else that you want to take us to or not. Otherwise, we just continue, but want to give you a heads up.
No, this is. I think this is good. I think we did a good job showing kind of how the cities would have looked and how the gamers designed it, and how that compared to what we actually know about the plague and some interesting architecture.
I still think we did an amazing job with the amount of details. With the little weeds growing and the planks placed around, and so I mean, I really like how they visually made this game to look like. Maybe not accurate, but definitely authentic.
Yes.
I think one of the questions that people normally ask when people are sending in questions and stuff is like, how would this be used in like a teachable way in terms of using Archaeogaming in that kind of way?
Sure. So one of the things that I've been a big advocate for, ways that you can use as games as a pedagogical technique are, let's see if I can show it here, is these little things here, these little codices that pop up. A lot of games will have these. In this game, they frame it as curiosities and gifts, but these little blurbs down here are really useful ways that people can talk about real artifacts, real material culture. Assassin's Creed does a really good job of actually linking in real actual artifacts, pictures from the museum, and then explaining how these were discovered. You could talk about what these material objects would have been used in day-to-day life. So these in particular, I really like that game designers now really go out of their way to.
I agree, Matt. I forgot about that. like you have Hugo's herbarium, where he like per level he finds a specific flower. And I am not a botanist at all. I don't know anything about plants. And I was actually reading all these entries about these plants just out of my own curiosity. Like, I'm not very interested in plants. I don't have flowers in my house or anything, but I was just like intrigued. I'm like, oh, a different plant. What is this one? Like, I was actually learning something.
Yeah, and actually, when you just read through this, I mean, what we were talking about earlier with Sacha talking about cleaning the boils on the body, that's exactly what this is describing. Now, I don't know if carnations actually were used in that, but I would suspect if somebody did their research on this and found that, in fact, they did mix carnations with vinegar. I don't know. Sacha, you might know if that's true or not. But the point is that these are really fantastic ways to integrate material culture that is still educational and has good pedagogical value, even if it's just something kind of a subset within the game. Because I read through these, and I know a lot of people do actually read through these, and you know, you can learn a lot of interesting things about stuff.
Right. And I think certainly for somebody who teaches a medieval class or a class on plagues or on pandemics or whatever, could totally do what we just did, but in a classroom setting, make a couple of save games and then go as a class together on a big screen in your classroom, you know, elementary school, high school, university, and just like play together and talk about what you see. And just as we did just now, I think that would be very useful in the classroom. Yeah. And students would enjoy it, and it's pretty to look at, and it's a video game, so it's cool, while being educational.
Yeah. And, you know, there is value in showing inauthentic things as much as there is in showing authentic things. We don't have to get so wrapped up in showing the world as it was, because the reality is the nature of archaeological evidence is we're never going to know that. We're never going to know exactly what the world was like 100%. We can only fit it to our best guess. But allowing the creativity of these designers, who are, you know, obviously masterful artists, to reconstruct these worlds for us, and then we can just get a feeling for it, even if it's, even if we can point out the places where it's wrong, that's still a teachable moment.
Right. Right. And something that I definitely do at a university level class is have students read an actual historical paper or primary source, and then compare that with the video game and point out similarities and discrepancies, because then you can really see if people understood the material, if they pick up on the mistakes themselves in the video game, and then they'll never forget for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of our time together. Matt and Sacha, thank you so much for being here. This was so much fun and so useful and educational. You want to say a couple of closing words, Matt?
Well, I didn't have anything prepared, but yeah, thank you for hosting this, and I hope we got some people interested in thinking about the nature of the plague and historical representations. Thank you so much to Sacha. You were, as Tine said, you're the perfect person to have as an additional commentator on this. Not only are you French, in which this game takes place, but you're a plague specialist, and that's just, it couldn't be more perfect. So I really thank you for taking the time, and especially with the time difference, to join us today. Your insight was really fascinating.
Sacha?
Thanks a lot, and thanks for inviting me and inviting us to take part to this Archaeogaming. I actually didn't know this kind of initiative before you contacted me 1 week ago, and it's actually really fun, and I was really happy to take part to this today, and I think it's really a good, nice way to just share information about the past and what we do in archaeology, history, and so on. So thanks again. That's great.
I think you should totally go around now and give presentations on this video game with your background knowledge. Just buy the game and go play it at conferences, and everybody will just be fascinated with what you have to say. Okay, so guys, we will be back in the spring. We won't have an Archaeogaming session in January because we're doing mini reading groups instead. So I think we will be back in February where we'll be playing another game of our choosing. So we hope to see you then. And in the meantime, have a good winter break. Bye.
Ciao.
And Matt, you can stop the stream.